Okay, this is the third video of the process of doing the color study. We've gotten our image transferred to our Bristol paper. That's the thick paper that comes in this pad. And this is the paper that's going to take the color really well, and it's going to hold up until we review our portfolios. And what I'm going to show you is the monochromatic color scheme. So you're going to do 3 color schemes: monochromatic, complementary, and analogous. And those are all explained in the PowerPoint presentation, and I'll try to explain them also as I'm working on it, just to remind you. So monochromatic, mono means one color. I chose blue. And what you want to do, I'm using these markers that have a brush tip and a fine point tip or finer point, but you don't have to use anything special. In fact, I also have a tray of my daughter's Crayola markers that would work just as well. You can also use colored pencils. You know, get inexpensive Crayola colored pencils. You could use crayons. I think it would even be cool to use like colored papers. You can use watercolors. I'm going to use a little bit of watercolor in mine, and there are watercolors available in the classroom. There weren't enough to put in everybody's kits, and I knew that you would only need them for this one project, but you can go and get them. Now you are going to need to have your map handy, because remember that we marked the darkest areas, the lightest areas, and sort of the medium areas. So I made myself a little key up here on my project, and that's fine. Just make it as inconspicuous as possible, but I think that having it actually on the paper helps you. So this is my darkest color, and so I've got all of my markers right here ready to go. This is my darkest color. This is a medium. It's not quite as dark as this one. This is my medium light. It's not quite as light as my lightest. And I don't know how often I'll need these, but I did notice that in my map, there are some areas where there's M's that are right next to each other. So that's why I chose 2 colors like that that are kind of in between. Now, if you're mixing colors like watercolor, then you're going to want to use purest pigment for your darkest colors, and you're going to want to create medium colors going onto a lightest color that you're just adding more water to. I don't recommend using like acrylic paint, definitely not oil paint, anything like that, because Bristol is not really for that kind of paint. But watercolor it does pretty good with. Just don't use quite so much watercolor. And I am going to add some watercolor to the background, the bigger areas of this, so I can show you how to use the watercolors in a good way. So I'm going to start with my darkest color and try to be, systematic and organized about this. So I'm looking at my map for the darkest shapes. You'll notice that when I use a brush tip, and you're not necessarily going to be using these brush tip markers, but you do have a brush tip pit pen, that when you use the brush tip, you don't go back and forth like a paintbrush. You kind of let the tip hit the paper, and I like to outline the whole shape, and then you fill it in, moving in one direction and kind of overlapping your strokes. That's what makes it look like a solid area instead of the kind of patchy. So you're just gonna, and I'm using really super light pressure with this brush tip because I don't want it to fray. So I'm looking at my map over here and then working over here and finding those darkest areas. So I'm looking, making sure that I'm not missing any more. And when we get all the way done, we might discover that we want to make some more of these shapes using the darkest dark for the million-dollar word, which is contrast. We're always trying to create a little bit of contrast. Okay, I'm going to move on to my next, which is my medium. And I'm just going to do a little dot just to make sure, just to check it. Like, okay, yeah, that's the one that is the medium. Especially with the monochromatic colors, they're going to be somewhat similar. Outline and fill. Markers are by far going to be your easiest tool to use for these color studies. Colored pencils as well. And colored pencils, you really can do the same, you can follow the same plan. So while I'm filling in these shapes, let's talk a little bit about why designers, painters, artists use a monochromatic color scheme. Well, it's definitely unifying. It's the most sort of harmonious. And depending on what color you use, colors create certain moods, have certain associations. So if you really want to drive home whatever statement it is that that particular color makes for you, then it might be a reason to use a monochromatic. Now here I have a little decision to make. This was a medium area in my photograph, and I really could also have my photograph next to me. I can make it the same color as his shorts, uniform, I don't know if they're called shorts, or I could go with my medium light. I think for balance purposes, I'm going to use the same color. And I just outlined that part, but I don't know that I'm going to necessarily make it the same color. I think I might make that the lighter color. Again, move in one direction if you are using a brush tip pen, but this goes for using a paintbrush as well if you're doing watercolor. That's what gets you smooth application and not the frayed kind of marks. Okay, so here I have this marked as a light area, but since I already outlined it with this, I'm going to cheat and make it this color. No one will ever know. You won't tell them. Okay, I'm going to check out and make sure this is the same light. Yes. So I have this marked as a light area. Okay, and I'm going to keep going from there. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the other areas of color, and then I'm going to start the next video where you can see using watercolor.